What would you do if you broke into a vault expecting to find money and instead found something so disturbing that keeping it secret could cost you your life, but revealing it could cost you everything else? That's the question 5 professional thieves had to answer on a cold November night in 2018. They'd been hired to steal what they thought was $15 million in cash from a private vault in Geneva, Switzerland. It was supposed to be simple. Get in, get the money, get out. No questions asked. But when they opened that vault, they didn't find money. They found something that powerful people had spent years hiding. Something that connected politicians, billionaires, and corporations to crimes that would shake the foundations of the global economy. Something so valuable and so dangerous that within 72 hours of that vault being opened, 3 members of the crew would be dead, 1 would disappear completely, and the last would be sitting in a police station trying to explain what they'd stumbled into. This is that story. And I need to warn you, what started as a simple heist became something far more complex. A conspiracy that reaches higher than you'd believe. A cover-up that's still happening today. And a choice that none of these thieves were prepared to make. By the end of this, you'll understand why sometimes the most dangerous thing you can steal isn't money, it's the truth. Let's start with the crew, because you need to understand who these people were before you can appreciate the impossible situation they found themselves in. Elena Rodriguez, 38 years old, vault specialist. She could crack any safe, bypass any security system, open any lock. Elena learned her trade from her father, who'd been a locksmith in Madrid before he started using those skills for less legal purposes. She'd spent 15 years working high-end jobs across Europe, museums, private collections, bank vaults. She was the best in the business, and she charged accordingly. Elena had one rule: no violence. She was a thief, not a criminal in her mind. She took from people who could afford to lose it, and she never hurt anyone in the process. That distinction mattered to her. It was the line between what she did and what she considered real crime. Marcus Chen, 41 years old, electronics and security expert. If it had a circuit board, Marcus could hack it. He'd grown up in Hong Kong, studied computer engineering at MIT, and spent 5 years working for a private security firm before he realized he could make 10 times as much money working against them. Marcus was quiet, methodical, and absolutely brilliant with technology. Thomas Birch, 35 years old, the logistics guy. Thomas planned routes, arranged transportation, secured safe houses, and made sure everyone got paid. He was former British military intelligence, and he understood how law enforcement thought, how they tracked criminals, and how to stay invisible. Thomas didn't look like a criminal. He looked like an accountant, which was exactly why he was so good at what he did. Nicole Deschamps, 29 years old, inside person. Nicole's talent was reading people, manipulating situations, and getting access to places she shouldn't be. She could become anyone, play any role, convince anyone of anything. Nicole had worked as an actress before she discovered her skills were more profitable in a different arena. She could walk into any building, any party, any secure location, and people would just assume she belonged there. And finally, the crew leader, James Sullivan, 46 years old, former insurance investigator turned professional thief. James had spent 20 years learning how valuable items were protected, and then he'd started stealing them. He was the one who found the jobs, assembled the crews, and made sure everything went according to plan. He had a reputation. If James Sullivan said a job was solid, you could trust it. These 5 people had worked together on 3 previous jobs: a diamond shipment in Amsterdam, art from a private collector in Paris, bearer bonds from a corrupt politician in Brussels. Every job had gone perfectly. They trusted each other completely. That trust was about to be tested in ways none of them could imagine. The job came to James through his usual channels, a client he'd worked with before. Wealthy, connected, anonymous. The kind of person who could afford to hire the best and knew better than to ask questions afterwards. The target was a private vault facility in Geneva, Switzerland. Not a bank. Private vaults are different. They're basically safety deposit boxes for the ultra-wealthy, people who don't trust banks, people who have things they need to keep hidden. The security is incredible, but it's designed to keep out amateurs. A professional crew with the right skills could get in. The client's instructions were specific. Vault number 847, a custom-built safe inside the vault room. The safe would contain approximately $15 million in cash and possibly some jewelry. Take everything, leave nothing behind. The payment was generous, $2 million split among the 5 of them, $400,000 each for a single night's work. James did his usual background check on the job. He verified the client's credentials through their shared intermediary, confirmed the money was real, checked police activity in the area. Everything looked clean. He assembled the crew at a rented apartment in Lyon, France, 2 weeks before the job. Elena spread out the blueprints of the vault facility on the dining room table. They'd cost $20,000 to acquire through a corrupt building inspector, but they were worth it. Complete architectural plans, security system layouts, everything they needed. The vault facility had 3 layers of security. First, the building itself, reinforced steel doors, armed guards, biometric scanners. Second, the vault room, time-locked door, motion sensors, pressure-sensitive floors. Third, the individual safes inside the vault room, each one custom-built to the client's specifications. Marcus pointed to the security system diagram. The entire facility was networked. Cameras, alarms, locks, everything connected to a central server. I can get us 45 minutes of system blindness, maybe an hour if we're lucky. I'll create a loop in the camera feeds, disable the motion sensors, and override the vault room door controls. But once the system realizes something's wrong, we'll have about 3 minutes before security responds. Elena studied the specifications of Vault 847's internal safe. Custom-built, German engineering, biometric lock combined with a 12-digit code. I can crack the biometric scanner. The code will take longer, maybe 20 minutes once we're in front of it. Thomas had already mapped 3 different exit routes from the facility. Primary route through the underground parking garage, secondary through the service entrance, last resort through the roof to an adjacent building. Nicole's role was simple but crucial. She'd pose as a cleaning service contractor doing a late-night maintenance check 2 days before the heist. She'd plant wireless repeaters that would boost Marcus's signal and give him remote access to the security network. She'd also map the guard rotations and identify any unexpected security measures the blueprints didn't show. James reviewed the timeline. Everything had to happen in a specific sequence. Marcus disables the security system. Elena opens the vault room door. Everyone enters. Elena cracks the safe. They load the contents into bags designed to block any hidden RFID trackers. They exit through the parking garage where Thomas would be waiting with a van. Drive to the safe house, count the money, wait 24 hours to make sure there's no immediate pursuit, then split up and disappear. Simple, clean, professional. They spent 2 weeks preparing, running through the plan, identifying potential problems. Marcus built the equipment he'd need to hack the security system. Elena practiced on a similar model safe they'd acquired. Nicole rehearsed her cleaning contractor role until she could do it without thinking. The night before the job, they gathered for a final review. James had one last piece of information from the client. The vault would definitely contain $15 million in cash, but there might also be documents. If they found documents, they should take them too. The client would pay an extra $500,000 for any papers in the vault. That detail should have been a warning. Why would someone pay that much for documents that were probably just financial records or property deeds? But none of them thought much about it. An extra $100,000 each. Easy money.
On November 3rd, 2018, at 2:30 a.m., they put the plan into motion. Nicole had done her job perfectly 2 days earlier. The wireless repeaters were in place, the guard rotations were predictable, no unexpected security measures. Marcus sat in a van 3 blocks away, laptop open, fingers moving across the keyboard. The security system's architecture appeared on his screen. He'd been probing it for weeks, learning its patterns, finding its weaknesses. Now he exploited them. The camera feeds looped, the motion sensors went dark, the vault room door's electronic lock disengaged. Elena, James, and Thomas approached the building. They were dressed as private security consultants, complete with fake ID badges that Nicole had arranged. If anyone saw them, they'd just appear to be contractors doing a late-night maintenance check.
The building's main entrance accepted Elena's cloned security card. The door opened, they were in. The lobby was empty. The security guard was at his station, watching monitors that showed him exactly what Marcus wanted him to see. Nothing unusual, just another quiet night. They moved through the building with practiced efficiency, down 2 flights of stairs, through a corridor to the reinforced door that led to the vault room.
Elena placed a hand on the biometric scanner. It read the false fingerprint she was wearing, a perfect copy of an authorized user's print that Nicole had lifted during her cleaning contractor visit. The scanner blinked green, the door unlocked. They entered the vault room. It was exactly as the blueprint showed. 200 private vaults lining the walls, each one numbered, each one containing secrets that someone had paid significant money to protect. Vault 847 was in the back corner, a custom safe, larger than most of the others, high-end German construction, exactly what they'd expected. Elena knelt in front of it, opening her toolkit. She attached a small device to the biometric scanner. It would cycle through possible fingerprint matches until it found the right one. While that worked, she tackled a numeric code. James and Thomas stood watch, one monitoring the door they'd entered through, the other watching the rest of the vault room. Everything was proceeding perfectly. Elena's fingerprint scanner cracked the biometric lock in 8 minutes. The numeric code took another 19. At 3:11 a.m., the safe door opened. That's when everything changed. Elena reached inside, expecting to feel stacks of cash. Instead, her hand touched something else, something unexpected. She pulled out a leather document folder, opened it, started reading the first page. Her expression changed, confusion, then shock, then something that looked like fear. James noticed immediately. He moved closer, keeping his voice low. "What is it?" Elena didn't answer. She kept reading, flipping through pages, her hands starting to shake. James took the folder from her, started reading himself, and as he processed what he was seeing, he understood why Elena looked terrified. These weren't financial documents. They weren't property deeds or bank records. They were evidence. Detailed, documented, undeniable evidence of crimes that connected some of the world's most powerful people to activities that would destroy them if this information ever became public. Names he recognized, politicians, CEOs, celebrities, people whose faces appeared on television, in newspapers, who shaped global policy and controlled billions of dollars. And the crimes detailed in these documents weren't white-collar fraud. They were much worse, much darker. The kind of things that would spark international investigations, topple governments, and send dozens of powerful people to prison for the rest of their lives. There were photographs, bank records, emails, testimony transcripts, everything meticulously documented, everything verified, everything authentic. Marcus moved closer to see what had him so rattled. He read over James's shoulder. His face went pale. The vault contained exactly what the client had promised, $15 million in cash, stacked neatly in the back of the safe. But it also contained something far more valuable and infinitely more dangerous. Leverage, blackmail material, evidence that someone had been using to control some of the most powerful people on the planet. And now that evidence was in their hands. Marcus's voice crackled through their earpieces. He'd been monitoring from the van, unaware of what they found. "Status, you've been in there 27 minutes. How much longer?" James pressed his earpiece to respond, but hesitated. What was he supposed to say? That they stumbled into something that could get them all killed? That the simple robbery they planned had just become infinitely more complicated? Elena closed the document folder. Her voice was steady, but James could hear the tension in it. "We need to take everything and get out now." They loaded the cash into their bags, $15 million, just as promised. Then Elena carefully packed the documents, folder after folder, maybe 50 pounds of paper in total. Evidence of crime spanning 2 decades. They exited the vault room at 3:34 a.m., retraced their path through the building. Everything still quiet, still proceeding according to plan. But James knew something had changed fundamentally. They weren't just thieves anymore. They were witnesses. And people who witnessed things like what was in those documents had the tendency to disappear. They reached the parking garage. Thomas was waiting with the van. They loaded the bags, climbed inside, and drove away at exactly the speed limit. Nothing suspicious, nothing memorable. They arrived at the safe house at 4:15 a.m., a rented industrial unit on the outskirts of Geneva. Thomas had secured it 6 weeks earlier under a false name. No cameras, no witnesses. Perfect for counting money and planning their exit. They unloaded the bags, locked the door, and then finally they could breathe. Marcus looked at the others. He noticed their expressions, the tension that hadn't been there during previous jobs. What happened in there? What aren't you telling me? James opened one of the document folders, spread some of the papers on the table. Watched Marcus's expression change as he read them. Nicole picked up another folder, started reading. Her hands were shaking by the 3rd page. For several minutes, nobody spoke. They just read, processing what they had accidentally stolen, understanding the magnitude of what they were holding. Finally, Elena broke the silence. We need to destroy these documents, burn them, make them disappear. Take the money and pretend we never saw any of this. Thomas immediately shook his head. Too late for that. Whoever owned these documents knows they're missing. They know someone took them, and they're going to assume we looked at them. James was pacing now, thinking through their options. None of them were good. The client who hired us, they knew about the documents. That's why they offered extra money for any papers we found. They were testing us, seeing if we'd take them. Nicole looked up from the folder she was reading. Or maybe the client is one of the people implicated in these documents. Maybe they hired us to retrieve evidence someone was using against them. Marcus pulled out his laptop, started searching for information about Vault 847's registered owner. It took him less than 5 minutes to find an answer that made everything worse. The vault was registered to a shell corporation. That corporation was owned by another shell corporation. 6 layers deep, Marcus traced the ownership until he found a name. Viktor Kozlov, Russian oligarch. Estimated net worth, $18 billion. Known connections to organized crime, suspected of arms dealing, money laundering, and various other activities that governments couldn't prove but everyone knew were true. Viktor Kozlov had been collecting evidence on powerful people for decades, using it to gain favors, make deals, and protect himself. He was untouchable because destroying him meant he released information that would destroy dozens of others, and they'd just stolen his insurance policy. Thomas checked his watch. It had been less than 2 hours since they'd opened the vault. Kozlov probably didn't even know it yet, but he would soon. And when he did, he'd deploy every resource at his disposal to get those documents back and eliminate anyone who'd seen them. James made a decision. They had to move fast. We split up, now! Take your share of the money and disappear. Different countries, different identities. We never contact each other again. Burn your phones, change your appearance, become someone else. Elena was already packing her share of the cash into a backpack. $4 million each, not the 15 they'd expected to split 5 ways, but right now survival was more valuable than money. What about the documents? James looked at the folder spread across the table. Evidence of crimes, names and dates and bank records. Information that could bring down some of the most powerful people in the world. We take them with us, scatter them. Each person takes some. That way if Kozlov's people find one of us, they don't get everything. It was a desperate plan, but it was the only plan they had.
They divided the documents. Each person took about 10 pounds of paper. Names they recognized, crimes they couldn't believe were real. Evidence that felt like holding a live bomb. By 6 a.m., they were ready to leave. They destroyed anything that could identify them, wiped down the safe house, prepared to scatter to different corners of the world. Nicole went first. She was heading to South America. New identity, new life. She hugged each of them briefly. Nobody said goodbye. Saying goodbye felt too final. Thomas left next, Southeast Asia. He had contacts there who could keep him hidden. Marcus was going to disappear into rural Japan, somewhere remote, somewhere he could monitor for any signs that Kozlov's people were getting close. Elena would head to Spain, She had family there who didn't ask questions. James planned to vanish into the Canadian wilderness, off the grid, no technology, no trace. They synchronized their watches. At noon, exactly 6 hours after they'd left the vault facility, they'd all destroy their phones simultaneously, cut the last thread connecting them. James was the last to leave the safe house. He took one final look around, making sure they'd left nothing behind. Then he walked out into the morning light, carrying $4 million and evidence of crimes he wished he'd never seen. For 72 hours, it seemed like their plan might work. James made it to a small town in northern Quebec. He'd rented a cabin under a false name, paid in cash, and started the process of disappearing. But on the 4th day, he saw the news. A body had been found in Geneva, burned beyond recognition. Dental records would eventually identify her as Nicole Duchamp. The police were calling it a random attack, a mugging gone wrong. James knew better. Kozlov had found her, and if he'd found Nicole, he'd find the others. James tried to contact Marcus through a secure method they'd established before separating. No response. He tried Thomas. No response. He was on his own now, and he had to make a choice. He could keep running, keep the documents hidden, keep hoping that somehow he'd be the one Kozlov didn't find. Or he could do something that might save his life, but would cost him everything else. He could go public. James spent 3 days weighing his options. If he released the documents, Kozlov would definitely kill him. But powerful people would also be exposed. International investigations would begin. The heat would be so intense that maybe, just maybe, Kozlov wouldn't be able to risk coming after him. It was a long shot, but it was the only shot he had. James encrypted the documents he'd taken, created multiple backup copies, and then he contacted a journalist, someone with a reputation for handling dangerous stories, someone who'd protected sources before. The journalist's name was Sarah Mitchell. She worked for an international news organization. She'd exposed corruption at the highest levels before. She understood the risks. James sent her an encrypted message with a sample of what he had, just enough to prove it was real, just enough to make her interested. Sarah responded within 12 hours. She wanted to meet, wanted to verify the documents, wanted to understand what she was getting into. They met in a public place, a busy coffee shop in Montreal. James chose the location carefully. Lots of witnesses, lots of cameras. Harder for Kozlov's people to make a move. Sarah was skeptical at first. She'd seen fake documents before, but as James showed her more, as he explained the source, as she verified details against information she already had, her skepticism turned to shock. "Do you understand what you're giving me? If even half of this is authentic, it's the biggest story of the decade, maybe the century." James understood perfectly. He understood that publishing these documents would destroy lives, topple governments, and shake the foundations of power structures that had existed for generations. He also understood that it was the only way he might survive. "How long do you need to verify everything and prepare to publish?" Sarah considered. Documents this sensitive required careful verification, multiple sources, legal review, protection against lawsuits and potential criminal charges. 3 weeks, maybe 4. James shook his head. "You have 1 week. After that, the people looking for me will probably find me. And if that happens, these documents disappear forever." Sarah agreed. 1 week. She'd work around the clock. She'd mobilize her entire organization. They'd publish everything simultaneously across multiple platforms in multiple countries, make it impossible to suppress. James gave her all the documents he'd taken, kept nothing for himself. If he was going to do this, he had to commit completely. For the next 6 days, James waited. He moved locations every 12 hours, never stayed anywhere long enough to be tracked, monitored the news constantly for any sign that Sarah's organization was ready to publish. On the 7th day, the story broke. Headlines around the world, documents verified, names named, evidence presented. The scandal was everything James had feared and hoped for. Massive, undeniable, impossible to ignore. Within hours, politicians were resigning, CEOs were being arrested, international investigations were launched. The documents James had stolen became the most consequential leak of the digital age. And Viktor Kozlov, the man whose vault they'd robbed, his name was in those documents too. Evidence of crimes he'd committed, people he'd blackmailed, money he'd laundered. Within 48 hours of publication, Kozlov was arrested in Moscow. Frozen assets, international warrants, extradition requests from 6 countries. He'd spent decades building his empire of secrets, and in one night, 5 thieves had accidentally destroyed it all. James watched the news coverage from a motel room in Nova Scotia. He survived. Against all odds, he survived. But the story doesn't end there. 2 weeks after the documents were published, authorities discovered another body, Marcus Chen, found in rural Japan, exactly where he said he was going. Official cause of death? Apparent suicide. But James knew better. Kozlov might have been arrested, but his organization was still operational, still tying up loose ends, still eliminating witnesses. 3 weeks after that, Thomas Birch was found dead in Bangkok, hit-and-run accident. Witnesses said the car seemed to deliberately target him. Elena disappeared completely. James tried to find information about her, but it was like she'd never existed. Either she'd successfully vanished, or she'd met the same fate as the others, and her body hadn't been found yet. James is the only one left, the only survivor of a crew that pulled off the perfect heist and then accidentally stolen something that powerful people would kill to keep secret. He lives somewhere remote now, changes locations frequently, never uses his real name. The $4 million he took from that vault sits in accounts he can't access without potentially revealing his location. The money is worthless to him now. He'd trade all of it to go back to that night in Geneva and make a different choice. To walk away when they saw what was in those documents. To let powerful people keep their secrets. But he can't go back. None of them can. Sarah Mitchell won a Pulitzer Prize for her reporting on the documents. Her organization became famous for exposing corruption at the highest levels. She's become one of the most respected journalists in the world. She's tried to contact James multiple times, to interview him, to tell his side of the story. But James has never responded. His story isn't one he wants told, not while Kozlov's organization is still looking for him. Viktor Kozlov himself is currently serving a 30-year sentence in a Russian prison. But even from behind bars, his influence reaches far. Money can buy many things, including revenge. The documents James and his crew stole led to 47 arrests across 12 countries. Politicians, executives, financiers, and criminals, all connected by the evidence they thought was safely hidden in that Geneva vault.
The investigations are still ongoing. More names are being revealed, more crimes uncovered. The ripple effects of that one night continue to reshape global power structures. But here's what keeps James awake at night. Here's what haunts him more than the deaths of his crew members or the constant fear that someone will find him. They never found out who hired them. The anonymous client who paid them to rob that vault, who knew the documents were there, who set the entire chain of events in motion. Was it someone who wanted to expose Kozlov? Someone who couldn't risk getting the documents themselves, but could manipulate a crew of thieves into doing it for them? Or was it Kozlov himself? A test to see if his security was adequate, a way to identify which documents were most valuable by seeing which ones thieves would target. James will never know, and that uncertainty is perhaps the worst part. Not knowing if he was a pawn in someone else's game, not knowing if everything that happened was planned from the beginning. All he knows is that he was hired to rob a vault, that the job seemed simple, that he assembled a crew of professionals who'd worked together before, and that when they opened that vault and saw what was inside, their lives changed forever. 3 of them are dead, 1 has disappeared, and James is living in hiding,
waiting to see if he'll survive long enough to someday stop running. The $15 million they stole? Authorities recovered most of it, returned it to Viktor Kozlov's frozen accounts, evidence in multiple criminal cases. But the documents? Those are public now, published, verified, impossible to suppress or deny. They exist in thousands of copies across the world, a permanent record of crimes that powerful people tried to hide. And somewhere, in a remote location that changes every few weeks, James Sullivan thinks about that night, about the decision to open Vault 847, about the moment everything changed. He thinks about his crew, Nicole, Marcus, Thomas, and Elena, professional thieves who made one mistake. They saw something they weren't supposed to see. They learned something they weren't supposed to know. And they paid for that knowledge with their lives. The vault contained exactly what they were hired to steal, $15 million in cash. But it also contained something worth infinitely more. Truth, evidence, proof of crimes that shaped the world. That's what James learned, that sometimes the most valuable thing in a vault isn't money, it's information. And that information can be more dangerous than any weapon. He was hired to rob a vault. He succeeded, but success in this case came with a price higher than he ever imagined paying. Every professional thief knows the risks: arrest, prison, even death if a job goes wrong. But those are known risks, calculated, understood. What James and his crew experienced was different. They stumbled into something beyond their understanding. They became witnesses to crimes that powerful people had spent fortunes to conceal. And they learned too late that some secrets are protected by forces far more dangerous than any security system. The vault is empty now, cleaned out by authorities. The documents are archived as evidence. The money is frozen. And the 5 people who broke in that night? 3 are dead. 1 has vanished, and 1 is still running, knowing that every day could be his last. That's the real story. Not the heist itself, not the technical skill it took to crack that vault, but what happened after. The choice they had to make, the consequences they couldn't avoid. They were hired to rob a vault. They succeeded, and that success destroyed them. Because sometimes the worst thing that can happen isn't failing to get what you came for. It's getting it and discovering that what you stole is worth far more and far more dangerous than anyone told you. James Sullivan understands that now. Every morning when he wakes up in a different location, using a different name, looking over his shoulder for threats that could come from anywhere. He pulled off the perfect heist, found more than he was looking for, and lost everything in the process. That's the price of stealing secrets from powerful people. That's what happens when you open a vault and see what's inside. You can never close it again. You can never unsee what you've seen, and you can never go back to the life you had before. The vault is empty now, but its contents changed the world, exposed corruption, destroyed careers, sparked investigations that continue to this day. And somewhere, James Sullivan is still running, still hiding, still alive, but forever changed by what he found in Vault 847. He was hired to rob a vault until he saw what was inside, and nothing was ever the same again.